To be here every day, Monday through Thursday. I'm here and never lose any enthusiasm or excitement for being here, especially when I'm with so many wonderful colleagues and individuals that I've gotten to know so well. Primarily today, Carl Dakin, Jason Jurado. Our word of the day is transitioning. We were actually talking about a little bit about that in a different area just now. Who knows? Maybe we'll get back to it. With that said, chat is now officially wide open, and love to hear your comments. Love to hear who you are and where you're from. What was kind of fascinating, me and Carl had done a show on Monday. Got very few comments, but I found out we had 40 some unique visitors so it's kind of funny how, maybe if it's interesting and it's new and different, maybe people just are glued to the screen, or we're answering all the questions as sooner before anybody can think of them. But it's always better together, more comments, more insights, and really makes us more relevant, more directed to creating a lot of quality takeaways. With that, I'll turn it over to Carl. Carl can give you a little bit of an update on Carl. Carl has a wonderful newsletter every day. So if you visit his profile and choose to connect with Carl, also choose to subscribe. Carl.
Good morning, Don. As I shared with Don, I'm recovering from a cold, or I still have it, or whatever. I don't know. But anyway, this is not my normal voice. Normally, I sound like a Hollywood actor. That's a joke as well. But the yeah, my background is I work with funding, and I typically work with small businesses, those that are looking to scale up, and community projects where we're trying to turn around or restart communities that have found themselves in a distressed position, and trying to get stuff going. And in doing that, it's interesting because you have to get beyond the numbers. You have to get into the community. You have to understand, how the community mindset is at, and you want them to make a transition, which is today's topic, of moving from maybe hopelessness, which is a worst case scenario, to one simply of I don't think it's ever going to work, which is a little bit not as bad, but still a bad state of mind, and saying, yeah, no, we can do something here. We can make a change. We can make a difference. And yesterday, I had a conversation with a guy in Chicago who put together a children's program called The Power of We. And he was trying to explain to me how bad the situation really is when he's bringing, kids in from the inner city, and they've never seen a strawberry before. It's their scope of experience is so limited because of all the barriers, communications, wealth, you name it, that they really don't see the rest of the world. They don't know what the potential is. And so to make a transition, and to some degree, you kind of have to know what your goal is going to be, the end in mind. And so they were trying to create these programs, which have now been repeated around the world, to say, hey, yeah, you've got it bad, but you're not done yet. Let's get going. Let's make a transition, be all you can be. And in this context, it's a major change, not a minor change in terms of transition.
Well, that's important. And, it just shows you the variety and different elements and areas and expertise that's out there, that combining and collaborating and then adding communication to it, you can create and encourage transitions on people's part. Because to Carl's point, some people just don't know what they don't know. How are they ever going to approach it? And it's, people opening doors for people, opening minds for people, and really creating hope for positive change. Because if you don't see a future, you're probably not going to have a future. What you're believing, what you're seeing is what you're going to be staying at, because it's been validated and confirmed so many other times by your bubble, let's say. And it's really, how do you penetrate those bubbles, or how do bubbles open up and expand to, larger opportunities? And most of it is just education, knowledge, and awareness. So, Jason, your turn.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you and Carl and Don. It's been a while since we've shared the platform together, so thank you for having me on today. Transition, yeah, I think we're all always transitioning in many different ways, whether it's personal, professional. The one thing is that we're always changing, but we're always the same. It's interesting that we have a new body. Our cells die and cells are reborn all the time, and we have a new body about once every year totally. I mean, your liver, I forget all the dates. Dr. Chopra is really good about talking about, 3 months for the liver and 6 months for the stomach lining and all that. But our bodies are we're always transitioning. However, we stay the same. As an example, I have this mark on my face here where I cut myself shaving, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. How do the cells that die and then the new cells that come around know to keep making that scar on my face from 10, 15 years ago, right? And that's the thing though, is that so as we transition, we can carry ourselves with it. And the other thing I'll say about transition is, Carl was talking about in some communities, they don't know what a strawberry looks like, which is that's sad in and of itself. But is our goal for people to know what a strawberry looks like, or to be connected to nature and be connected to, resources and where their food comes from and stuff like that nature? So as we transition, we have to look at what are we taking with us from the past and what are we grabbing new, and how do we make those meld so we're most successful?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I believe what live streaming and what we're attempting to do here on a regular basis is open up communication channels that were never available, because it really comes truly down to access. I'm sure people in inner city see TV and movies and see people living different lifestyles, but they don't experience it in their own lifestyle. It's a separate place that isn't somewhere there that's easily accessible or inviting. There's a lot of people who could open up to a lot of people. I was just reading, my son's works for Johns Hopkins University, and it's out in Baltimore, beautiful school, one of the top medical institutions in the world. And I just saw 2 days ago how Mike Bloomberg provided $1 billion. So anybody who makes who comes from a family that makes under $300,000 a year gets free tuition.
I saw that.
Anybody who comes from a family with $170,000 or less income, which is still a fair income, gets full room and board and tuition. So no one who is qualified is restricted from going to those schools. And, Mike Bloomberg has 50-some billion. Still a lot of money, but it's only 2%. And I'm sure he continues to create more wealth. But it's people stepping up to balance the middle. There has been, through studies, if you go back 30, 40, 50 years ago, the difference between the highest paid employee in a company and the lowest paid was something reasonable, 15, 20 times. And now it turns out to be thousands of times. And the company itself may not be creating any value, let alone supporting any value.
Right.
So I think it lends itself to reexamination and say, hey, they say you're only as good as your weakest link. If you could raise people from a lower place to a higher place, and not by giving them money, but by providing educational opportunities, occupational opportunities, and everybody can do a little of that. Taking some school supplies to your school. I know so many teachers are buying stuff on their own just to make sure kids got crayons and pencils. So we've got Carrie. Don't want to neglect Carrie. He's already got 3 comments. It should be motivation for everybody else out there to make a comment if you choose to. Carrie says, the cat looked at me with a look and said, you've got to be kidding me with those awful kitten puns. Thank you. And Carrie is proud to be off of coffee and caffeine for 894 days. At a certain point, I would think you're over it. So with that said, Carl, what's your new ideas and thoughts?
Well, it was interesting. I recall going way back to my undergraduate days when I took a course on social aspects, and they would tell you that statistically, only so many people, like 8%, will rise to a higher social income bracket than what they were born into, and about the same percent would fall to a lower income bracket. And of course, I came from what I considered to be a point low enough that I thought it was inevitable that I should do better than where I was coming from. But I kind of took it as a challenge that, who's to tell me statistically that I can't do better than, where I started. And yet, as you work with people over time, you come to see how they, one, they get comfortable, and that may be the wrong word. They get they get accepted to where they're at, and they don't like to challenge, going out of their comfort zone to try to do something more, something different. There's there's a tendency to try to stay in a zone where you're familiar with what's going on rather than engaging in something you don't know with the associated fear or concerns that go along with that. So doing transitioning intentionally takes a little bit of courage. It takes a commitment. And it's going to be undertaking some degree of risk. You're going to be doing things you haven't done before. You're going to have to accept that some things are different. And I like Jason's comment that when you change, you're not changing 100%. You're carrying with you your past, sometimes baggage that would be better left behind, but nonetheless, it's not a complete 100% change. It's a matter of degree, and a lot of change I think can occur with some very minor changes. It's just it's getting out there, going after it in order to make the transition.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, looking back, I came from challenging environment. And at the time, you don't know any better, and that's the world you live in. But it really prepares you well if you are able to leverage that adversity going forward because you've got something to compare against, right? If you have very little, you appreciate very little more. If you grow up kind of pampered and with everything, you kind of get, weakened in a lot of ways. And all of a sudden, there's so many kids that grow up and they don't know how to do anything without somebody supporting them. So, looking back is always easier than looking forward. But it's also about modeling when you make a transition. Shaq was on some
Right.
short, and he was saying that he's a really great guy. There's a show on HBO that has him and five other people who do things nobody knows that they're doing. One was Mr. Beast, and on and on. And what opened his minds is he would go to black schools and ask the kids who believe sports or basketball is their way out, and like 90% of the kids' hands would show up. You go to white schools, and only 10%. They were thinking about being doctors and lawyers, so they had more options. They had more visibility, and the chance of being an NBA star it's almost like hitting a lottery.
Right.
So how do you get people who can get supported early? And I think that's why things like lunch programs, breakfast programs, early learning programs, making the investment early to show possibilities. Because when someone believes it's possible, especially if someone around them is modeling it, then it becomes more validated. And, any transition takes work. It's like breaking out of a shell. It's easier to sit still than to push it. And a lot of times you push it and you go nowhere and get resistance, but you got to go the second mile and the third mile. And I think, whether we're talking about business, personal, academic, it's really about where are you, Where do you plan on going? Me and Carl spend a lot of time talking about planning, projecting, visualizing. And when do you decide it's time to pivot? When did you have enough of this, and now you don't have enough of a lot of other things that can support and complement it? So, Jason, what are your thoughts?
So some great points, and I wrote down some notes about, as Carl was talking and thinking about it as you were talking, Don. The challenge is, and Paul Zane Pilsner's an economist, written several books. He actually worked in the Reagan White House, and I really respect what he's got. He's also a rabbi, a part-time rabbi, so he's really well-rounded, coming from kind of like this panel, coming from different angles at issues. And he was talking about, he was a Brooklyn kid, grew up in Brooklyn, and back in probably the 40s, 50s, and he was talking about how his neighborhood was what he knew, and he got to Princeton and was like, everyone had these rich, expensive cars, and he saw a life that he didn't even know existed, and that's kind of what you're both talking about, is about that integration, about being able to see bigger. So it's, they say if you're the smartest person in the room, go to a different room. It's kind of similar to economics, where if all you see is a certain thing, you might not be able to dream bigger, or not have what we call permission, so to speak, to dream bigger. And so who you surround yourself with is so important. And that's like, here on these LinkedIn Lives, it's a community, and we all bring something different to the table, and hopefully it allows people from the comments to the people like us that are in the conversation directly to be able to see something differently, and see something to where we see a potential to grow, and how we can grow differently, and a new idea. So I think it's very important on who you surround yourself with.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that gives you, kind of a peephole into doors that you probably never knew existed, and can give you and that's what movies have done for so many people. I mean, if you look at so many movie stars that came up in the old days, the only thing that they had that was uplifting was the movies, where they could go there for 2 hours and get lost in Robin Hood or dinosaurs or whatever they were playing. And people decided, hey, I want to do that. So I guess wherever there were movie shows, there were more motivation, and it was fantasy. So you could escape into situations that were never real for anybody. And at a certain point, you got to ask yourself, what do you want to do instead of what have you had to do? A lot of people get pot luck in life. They graduate college, a boyfriend or a friend says, my dad's got a job for you. And they find themselves 30 years later working in a broom factory, maybe doing really well, but that was never what they set out to do. On the other side of the coin, there's so many people, especially kids. Ask a 4 or 5-year-old, what do they want to be? I want to be an astronaut. I want to be president. I want to be this. And slowly those dreams get knocked down. You're not good enough. You're not big enough. You're not strong enough. You're not smart enough. You're not rich enough. Actually, there's a gentleman on LinkedIn I had on the show a few times. His name is Kofi. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Wonderful gentleman. His story, which I like to repeat, is he grew up in a very remote African village. And they had to go 4 miles if they could to get to school, had to get their own water every day. And what changed his life, he was like 5 or 6 years old, and he asked his dad, hey, what's that big thing in the air? And his dad said, that's an airplane. And it was so foreign to him. And he says, what does that do? He says, well, people travel in it. And his dad finished with saying, but you'll never, ever ride on an airplane because those aren't meant for people like us. Fast forward, he's a captain in the U.S. Air Force, flies his own plane, wrote his own book, actually signed a copy and sent it to me. And it was only because his dad said, you'll never be able to ride on that he committed that he would. And because of that commitment, it continued to carry on, became a U.S. citizen, entered the Air Force, became a captain. Doesn't fly in the Air Force. He flies on his own. He's in intelligence or whatever. But it just shows you words mean so much, especially to people who are hoping or don't even know they should be transitioning. And things we take for granted is something that a lot of people don't even understand or appreciate. So I think that's where mentoring could be such a big element in helping people transition. Is, you could, like they say, give a guy a fish, he eats for a day, teach him how to fish, he eats forever or something. There's hope. And I think that's the key to the messages we try to communicate here on a regular basis, is if we can do it, you can do it. And there's people have done it better than us. So, there's room for everybody on the boat. The boat's plenty big if you want to do what it takes to swim to it and get on it. Carl?
Well, one of the comments I heard yesterday, I kind of took to heart. Something you mentioned earlier is that a person being told you can do more sometimes has a hard time understanding, accepting, even wrapping their mind around what that new thing is or that difference. And one of the things that is most helpful is to have someone as an example who's done it, who's been through the drill, who started at the same level that the person in the audience, the person you're talking to about, and says, hey, look what I did. I was in the same place you were 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It doesn't really matter time-wise, but look what I'm doing today. And the person I was talking to yesterday was saying that he had somebody offer a sponsorship for his program. And he said, who are you sending on behalf of your company who's been there, done that, to serve as the illustration, the example? And they said, we're not sending anybody. He says, then your sponsorship money's nice, but it isn't going to do me any good, because we can sit and talk down to someone all day long, and without them seeing that it is possible, that it's been done, that they're not going to be the first person to do something new and novel, it's hard to convince anyone that they're going to get there. So mentorship, I think, is important. Mentorship, particularly by people who have been there, done that, I think comes across with so much credibility that the people go, well, yeah, this person can do it, then it must be possible. And then it becomes a question, can I do that? And then they have to rise to the challenge. They have to make that intentional commitment to make a difference in their own lives.
Yeah, and what it says is it repeats itself beyond that. Again, getting back to Shaq, he grew up in a military background. His dad was in the service and traveled all around and ended up in different places. And what really made a big difference in his life was the Boys and Girls Club of America. It was a place he could play, a place he could be with other kids. And now he's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, contributor to that. So what works for you works for others like you. And, I think there's also a give back element, because a lot of people, the challenge is when they get to somewhere, they don't feel worthy. They don't think they deserve it, and that's why people sign a $30 million contract at 21, at 26 are broke, because they didn't have a lot of the skills, or everything was about consumption and not about timing and positioning. And I think that's where mentoring comes in so much, is give a little context, share examples. It's always easier to tell somebody what you do and how you do it than to tell them how to do it. It's a lot easier to say, I know what you're feeling. I've been there before. Here's what I did when I was in that situation. You allow that person to learn, listen, and accept, or take a variation. Or sometimes it took the first conversation to have the second conversation. People, to your point, Carl, have to meet people at their level. And the key thing with any communication is trust. If you don't believe I'm sincere, if you don't believe I'm here out of the goodness of my heart, and I'm just here because someone made me, or I'm obligated somehow, people, especially in need, are very sensitive to everything, because a lot of times they're challenged. So it's getting to know people, taking the time. And as you get to help others, you really do get to help yourself, because there's parts of everybody in you, either in the past or in the present. And it might be a different area of transition. It could be career or whatever. But I do believe the hope for humanity is peer to peer, is people sitting right next to you who you can have a kind word with, and wherever you want to take it, that's even better. Jason?
So much great stuff in this conversation. Yeah, and it builds on community. It builds on, you talk about mentor, and Don, as you know, that I'm a veteran, and that group's a very big show me kind of group, whether it's mental health or it's, I'm part of a veterans entrepreneur group as well. And it's just to say, I mean, we're all different people because we are all different people, but having that experience, it's nice. They can say, oh, well, you got out of the Marine Corps and did this, and this, and made it to here, or you got out of the Marine Corps and went through this, and you were able to deal with your mental health and ask for help. So that in that way, like with a mentor, as an example, it helps, to be able to say kind of here's my my papers, here shows that I'm certified and I'm legit, because sometimes people are telling you stuff. It's like you see people on here telling you about, I'll teach you how to make $1 million. And the way the way to make $1 million is to get a bunch of people to pay you $10,000 to teach them how to make $1 million, and they haven't made their $1 million yet. And so, there's obviously teachers you don't have to be the best doer. Like Tiger Woods might not be a great golf teacher, even though he was at one point the greatest golfer. So there's that balance too. So I'm not trying to go all one direction, but someone that has some skin in the game, someone that has some understanding, like you're both saying. And so as you look to transition, find those people. Surround yourself with those people that can help you personally, not can help people in general, but can help someone that's on your path.
Yeah, and I think that lends itself to collective activity, community activity, because even if we take today's show and any one of us would have been by ourselves today with the word transition, it would have never grown in the different ways and flavors that it is today, because everybody gets to throw something into the pot,
right?
Typically based on what someone else just said. If that person hadn't just said it, you'd still be building off of yourself, which is pretty limited.
Right.
You're not learning very much if all you say is what you know. But when you can incorporate with other people's experiences, and sometimes that'll ring a bell. Oh, I remember I had an experience and it took that person to stimulate that thought. Or maybe I had 70% of what I was going to say and that other person provided the 30. Now I'm complete. And it's no different than a race where you switch the baton, a relay race, I guess you would call it. And your goal is to run as fast as you can, but the biggest thing is make sure the next person gets the baton in full stride.
Right.
If you run the fastest segment and you drop the ball or you just hang out, it's done for the team. And I think, this world is all about teaming up in the right way, having the right positive numbers. I think the key is how do you change the filter that we're doing things that are positive. We're talking about important things. It seems with so many microphones out there that are free and available, people are talking louder, meaner, angrier, and getting people riled up with nowhere to go. What you don't want to do is stimulate people where all they can use is their bad devices. And hopefully there's a movement of change that people can be the more positive thing. But I've always said that about the news. How come they never show who got married today, who had kids today, who had all these wonderful block parties? It's always the traffic deal, the violent situation. And I guess human nature just gets attracted or gets mesmerized by things that are shocking. The things that are calming in some ways aren't as public, and that's where you have to kind of niche it out and protect yourself from things that when you're done with it, you feel worse for being part of it. I always wondered, I'm a little different, but I could never go to a slasher movie. I could never go to somewhere and see heads rolling and blood flying and for 2 hours feel safer for it. So, Carl, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think one of the things that is important that Jason referred to is the sense of community. as we're approaching the Olympics, we're going to have athletes who have spent their lives preparing to be the best in the world. But when they do the background on it, it's like the hometown kid made good. The entire community's behind it. They're all feeling part of the pride or sharing in the pride of that person and what they've accomplished. And I think for a lot of people to transition, they need more than their own commitment. They need the community kind of to rally behind them and to help them. You need more people telling you, you can do it, go for it. It's like approaching the end of a marathon race, and people are ringing bells and shouting, "You can do it! You know, move forward!" And it's empowering to have that sense of people who says, "Yes, they're telling me I can do more than what I thought I could do, or I can push harder than I've been pushing." And I think this is something that we've kind of lost a little bit in our communities. We tend to, fall back into ourselves, or our lives become separated from each other. And as we're working with communities to talk about revitalizing them, we have to create, as we see it, a sense of unity, a sense of common ownership or participation, where we're all one group. We're not a bunch of individuals who happen to live in the same neighborhood. Um, so I think it's important, for transition on an individual basis, but also on a community basis, is we understand each other, we understand how we can work with each other, how we can support each other, it's something that I think that is a skill that needs to be relearned, or we need to reinvigorate it in some level, so that as groups, as teams of neighborhoods or people who live in a common area or even have a common cause, how do you come together to create that greater synergy, that greater outcome than what you can do on an individual basis?
Yeah, that's so very important, community support. Before I turn over Jason, just as an example, growing up in Detroit, and once in a while you might go to Toledo, which is only about in Ohio, about 90 miles away. On the way, you'd pass Monroe, Michigan. And when you get to Monroe, Michigan, it says proud home of George Custard, you know, because he was born in Monroe. So everybody has their cult hero, even though George Custer's name is not really something that most people look at as a hero. But for the town, or there's a place in Pennsylvania where Jimmy Stewart came from, a really small town near Punxsutawney, actually. And everybody says that's our native son. So, you just never know. And I think that's really the key. If you even take like the WNBA this year with Caitlin, whatever her last name is, they're now filling 21,000 seat stadiums, and they couldn't give the tickets away a couple of years ago. Why? Because there wasn't a personality.
Right.
There wasn't something that everybody could rally around and want to see. I mean, Tiger Woods really, in so many ways, optimized golf, because after Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer and those people, there was a middle ground where no one really stood up, and all of a sudden he showed up and everybody took an interest. So it does show that interest is fickle, and that works both ways. You can't lean on it forever, but eventually someone's going to show up and it's going to make a movement. Same thing with hit songs, right? How does something last for 6 months and something doesn't make it for a day? Well, caught fire somehow, and you never know what's going to catch fire. Jason?
A lot of good points, and we talk about one thing. I want to go back to what Carl was talking about is we were kind of bouncing off community, and earlier, as I had shared with you, Don, we were talking a little bit off about kind of just catching up, and I was sharing with you a group I'm working with. And you know that I've also done work with my wife recently, and so I was saying we, because that's how I envision it. Because when I think about going forward and transitioning, I always think of it as a group. And so I was using the term we, and you were asking me about, well, is it you and your wife? And I was like, oh no, the group. And I think that's what's important about us is that and I use this saying a lot, but if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. go in a group. And that's, I think, the key to transitioning is building your group and being open to it. I think nowadays we have a challenge of, there's a lot of, you're talking about a lot of microphones, and there's a lot of people out there that want to be, are happy being court jesters and just entertaining for a second to get that one little flash of recognition and that external recognition. And it's like, well, why don't we build something more? Why don't we build a kingdom? Well, to an extent, obviously, there's that. I don't want to open that whole door about kings and serfs and all that, but hopefully you get the point. Is like, let's build more than that. Let's not have that flash. Let's look at the long term and let's build something together.
Yeah, that is so important. Carl, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that this is a common issue with small businesses. Too often, the press tends to get behind what they call the lone wolf entrepreneur, the person who did everything by themselves, didn't get any help from anywhere. And I hear these stories and I'm going, well, why is he being stupid? Why didn't they get some help? It was available everywhere. Why did you have to do it the hard way? And because it contributes to failure. And it's one of the things we've talked about here and on other shows is that confidence comes from success. And when you try something new, the odds are way against you being successful the first time. And in order to get to the second time, you may need help. You may need to go beyond yourself. You may need somebody to be encouraging to you. Because you may go through several repetitions before you finally gain traction. You finally find your market. You find something that is appealing to other people with your products or services. And yet the press tends to like the story of the lone wolf, and you see it all the time. And I just kind of laugh about it because I agree with Jason. I tend to say we all the time because I can't think of anything that I really did by myself. I may have been the person who stood up first, or I may have been the person who led the charge, but I didn't lead a charge if there's no one behind me, going along with me.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it looks kind of foolish when you're out there running with a banner, and no one's behind you.
Well, it reminds me of Forrest Gump when he started running. And like hundreds of people continued to follow him with no one knowing why are they running or where they're going. So there is herd mentality, and people can be like sheeple, where they'll go wherever they can follow someone. But it also makes you more innovative and resourceful because again, starting bootstrapping, and everything I ever did started with bootstrapping because that's all I had was maybe a couple pair of shoes. You would find where you fit. And I would go to as many trade shows and conferences in the early days to meet, greet, and get to learn and go to the seminars. And because I really didn't have any resources, I started a business with a $10,000 car loan and had to put half of it into fixtures and everything else. I never forget, people would come in and they'd buy something and I'd say, I'll take care of that empty box for you if you want. And I'd always take that empty box and put it behind a full box. And I double my perceived inventory. And for some reason, people never wanted the last socket set, even though it wasn't like cabbage or lettuce, that people don't want your last piece of produce.
Right.
And then when I went to trade shows, I didn't go to vendors. I went to all of the media. And I got to know the publishers and the editors. They always were the ones who invite you to parties and invite you to fairs. But most importantly, they'd write articles about you. And that would validate you enough to send the article to people who you were interested in doing business with. So, the word has never been more powerful than it is today. How you leverage it, how you use it, and really how you gauge what you need. Because of, they say it's not what you need or want, it's what you deserve that you usually get. And no one really cares if you hit the lottery and have 20 million in the bank or you're broke. That has nothing to do with their situation. And you never want to have people feeling sorry for yourself. Just to get generous charity that's a one-time deal isn't as important as, hey, Is there something we can do together? Or more importantly, I learned the art of service. What is it you need? What is it I can do? I need to learn. I'm happy to serve. And then you prove yourself, because now you're not selling, and that's where internships do so well for people, is they will get positions with great organizations because they're willing to work for free. They're willing to do what other people aren't or can't do. And my son's a great example. He started out with the Denver Outlaws at 18 with an intern for 2 or 3 years, made nothing, kept asking me, why is everybody leaving and I'm staying and all my friends are making money and I'm doing it for free? And I said, well, you're paying your dues, you're learning. And eventually he became an equipment manager, defensive coach, and then general manager at 32 of a professional team. Why? He put the 14 years in, got to know everybody, got to have people know him for what he was and what he could do, and it served him well. So, pay more early to get, it's like pay now or pay later. And I actually said, hey, listen, what are you going to make if you work somewhere? And he said, I think 10, 11 bucks an hour. I said, I'll pay you that. Go to work for them. And you know what? He never asked for the money. And he was always good like that. But I said, hey, if it's just the money, they're going to ruin you at a Burger King. They're going to give you a world you don't want to see, you won't have a future in. And I think that's by, even when I get together with family, and I'm not the business counselor that goes around one-on-one, but I'm always trying to understand where people are and at least applaud them for being there. And not everybody needs to change, and not everybody wants to change. I think the key question, if you're helping people transition, are you really happy where you are? Are you enjoying where you are? Well, then stay where you are, because that's rare. And make incremental changes, invest in learning. There was a saying, if you want to know who someone is, you ask them what they're reading, and that'll tell you who they are. If they're reading really interesting books, then, they're advancing. If they're reading comic books, well, maybe they're getting entertained. And there's nothing wrong with anything. And I think that's where judgment really needs to be reserved when you're working with people. Too many people are fast on the trigger. I heard this, that's that. It's like name that tune or something, when it should be explain a little more. Share a little bit, and hey, we can talk about it, at another date. So, Jason, what are your new thoughts with all these different things rolling around?
Some great things, and Don, you had said something earlier. It's interesting. And then right now you kind of said the opposite side, the tale of two cities. It was the best of times, the worst of times. You'd mentioned about getting right out of school, going, I think, a broom factory and just staying there and just like, oh, whatever. But then you also talked about, like your son going there, sticking it out, working for 14 years and getting it. Is there a strategy? Is there a purpose? Is there a reason when you do these things? So one person just got into it and was like, okay, I'm comfortable. It's good enough. And I'll just write it out, to where, not to put words into his life, but so to speak, but your son said, I have a vision. I want to do this. I want to grow. And I think that's very important, is to have an awareness of where you're at and where you want to be and what's going to get you there. And that quick little payout, like you earlier were saying, I've had some internet issues. You were talking about someone making a lot of money early in life, 5 years later having no money, because you go for that quick thing and not having a plan built into it. I think that's very important to realize, that as you transition, having a strategy, and you don't have to have everything planned out, but you have to have an idea of where you're going. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, because you had also talked about this, is, we talk about asking for help, and there's a lot of things wrapped into that. But at the same time, people want to help you, but they really want to help people that help others. So you have to look at that. So are you giving back? If you're going to someone with open hands going, here, give me something, they might not want to help you. But if you go there and say, hey, I'm dedicated, I want to do this, I can give this, and show it in return, they're more likely to help you. And that way everyone grows.
Yeah, that's so important, because everybody has enough to do. Everybody doesn't have enough time to do it all. And when you make time for something or somebody else, it has to, in your mind, be deserving,
Right.
right? It's a lot easier to pick somebody up who just fell in front of you, and out of guilt or obligation, you may do it, but you'll do it because it's necessary or it's important. And you probably feel worse about yourself if you just walk by somebody who needed just a little bit of assistance and you disregarded them. So, the way I see it is every day is a new day for everybody. You can't live tomorrow based on yesterday. Yesterday's gone, which is good for people who haven't had a very good yesterday. It's not so good for someone who had a great yesterday, because now how do you repeat it? And I think it's also knowing the odds, is what's the expectation? I mean, in most cases, it's 6, 7 times of rejection before you figure out how to get an approval or you find the right approval. I know Carl's always focused on who's in and who's out, who's playing and who isn't. And I think knowing people, hearing things, because it's all just like how many people say, I just went to a great pizza place last night, you got to go to it. Well, based on that, you're probably going to go to it, and you're going to go in thinking it's great. If someone says went to a lousy pizza place and you just happen to mosey in, you're already thinking lousy. What could be lousy? And you start finding what is it that isn't good. So how you really package and present to yourself, how do you visualize what could be? And then how do you make more things happen? I mean, last night it was a kind of funny last night. It's my son-in-law's birthday coming up, and my daughter-in-law decided she saw a video where someone invited everybody's friends to Costco, and no one knew it. And all of a sudden, the person we walk around and see their dad. Oh, what a coincidence! And they see their best friend, and eventually, 30 people who are there. And I had a chance to sit down with my grandson, and it was really cool because for $9.95 a pizza, if you got 30 people showing up, I mean, for $40, no tip, no service, and it's right there in 4 minutes for you. And it was just a great time. And I was talking to my grandson, because he's my grandson, my granddaughter, the ones I'm always kind of like focused on. And he just got finished with his swimming team, and it's kind of incredible. You got to be there at 6 a.m. and start practice, and then they have meets and stuff, and he's gotten better every week. And I said to him, what do you think? You're going to do it again? Nah, it's not as much fun, And I said, well, you're in drama for 3 years, and it wasn't much fun either. I said, tell me, what is fun that you should start thinking about? Oh, I don't know. I said, well, what I think is you got to create your own fun. It doesn't come to you. You have to find it. And you could find fun in everything, or you can find no fun in everything. And I think it's really throwing it back for review. I mean, I know me and Carl talk about plans. A lot of times you'll put a plan in, maybe for financing or expansion. They'll turn it right back to you. Say it looks good, but you didn't fill out this section, or you're pretty weak here. Can you come back and demonstrate something? So I think it's not, it's that saying, if at first you don't succeed, try again. That's what makes the difference between the winners and the players, is they don't take no as an answer. I always heard no is not yet. So when someone said no, it's like, well, I didn't do a good enough job. I took responsibility. I didn't do a good job of explaining. Might have got you at the wrong time. If I really want to connect and do something with you, I'll go back to work. And when people see you went back to work, when most people would just say, forget this guy, I'll look for an easier target, that's really showing character. And I think when you're talking about people who have the wherewithal to help people, they get attracted to integrity. They get attracted to people who go the extra mile. And I was, like I say, very fortunate. I had a gentleman who found something in me I didn't even see in myself, and decided to invest in me. And we became best friends and partners and associates for 12 years. And at the very end, I said, Fred, what can I do to take care of you? I mean, I can't think of a thing. And all he said is, find somebody like you and do for that person what I did for you.
Yeah.
That's more than enough compensation. And I never forgot that, you know, and it came naturally. It wasn't like he had to say something or do something. It was just who he is. And I think authenticity of all parties involved and humanity for all people involved. I know there's people that went beyond agreements and terms and legalese to say, I'm going to grant you this, or I'm going to give you a special whatever it is. And it's like when people do something like that, it's like, to be honest, I wouldn't have done that for someone. But now that they've done it for me, I could see how it could mean something. Carl?
Yeah, I think that we've got so many different ways to achieve transition to move ourselves or our group or whoever we're associated with forward. And it is a matter of planning. As Jason pointed out, you need to have a goal, you need to have a plan. You can dive into something new, but you should also have if you want to call it a kill date or a drop dead date that says, if I can't get it done by this time in this way, then either I'm doing it wrong or it's not possible, but I shouldn't do it forever. And too many times I see people working harder, not smarter. And they keep flailing away saying that I think if I just keep at it long enough, it's going to happen. And I'm going, yeah, but what's changing in all this? It is one thing to repeat it or to try again, but at some point, you also have to accept defeat. And before you start down that path, it would be a good idea to kind of draw a line in the sand and go, if I do this 5 times or 10 times, and I can't seem to be making any progress, maybe I should stop and rethink this whole idea.
Right.
But I like experimentation. I like to try new things. It's hard for me to go to 2 restaurants, the same restaurant twice in a row. That's not my thing. It's not like Cheers where everybody knows your name kind of a thing. I walk in a restaurant and they're all like, "Oh, you a new customer?" I go, "Yes, I am," and I'm trying it out for the first time. But in order to do that, you've got to have an understanding that new transition things that are there are going to be pushing back at you because you're not familiar. You don't know where everything's at. You're going to have to learn things, do things differently. You may have to accommodate yourself to something. And yet there's rewards for going through the process. You might find that new great restaurant that nobody's told you about yet. You're the one who gets to say, "Hey, you need to go over to the new pizza place. They have awesome pizza."
Yeah.
And everybody goes, "Carl, how do you know all these pizza places?" Because I don't go to the same place twice. you know, it's just that kind of constant experimentation. But I think that's the biggest challenge is in transition is to recognize that new is a challenge. It will require a little bit of effort, work, or risk, however you want to define it. And if you can do that, you'll get to learn new things, you get to meet new people, and the benefits far exceed any of the downside.
Yeah, absolutely. And balance is so important. Having all your eggs in one basket is a bad situation because if you win big, but if you lose, there's nothing to compensate it for. And everybody goes through ups and downs, or they're not honest. It depends on what it is. And I remember during one part of my career where everything was falling apart and it was accelerating. And when things go bad, you find out who your friends are. People who return your calls, people are still there, and other people you can't believe it, you know. And I'm not a kind of a quitter. I've done things way too long, spent way too much, but I finished it. And looking back, I probably shouldn't have done it, but I wouldn't have known that unless I would have gone through it. So, anyways, there are days I just crawl out of the office. It was just kind of challenging. And it was like one day at a time, don't get excited. And I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel, but I didn't see the light yet. And I remember coming home. This is in the early days, and my wife was upstairs cooking dinner. and both kids were like 3 and 6, and they both grabbed a leg and started jumping up and down when I came home, and the dog was barking. And, I had like an epiphany. I said, I am the richest man in the world right now, because what I have here, you can't put a price on. And it changed everything. And if I wouldn't have felt so awful, I wouldn't have been so open to some relief. And I realized priorities were wrong. I was living that, hey, I'm going to get a bigger house. I'm going to get a bigger car. We're going to have more of this. Kids are going to private school. I mean, you just think that you're just creating value when you already have it, and you're better off staying there and keeping things simple. Being just humble goes a long way. You can't be disappointed unless you set yourself up for disappointment, and I think that's important. And if you can live every day to your fullest, if you can be proud every night you put your head on the pillow that I did the best I could, and I was a good person to everybody I came in contact with, well, that is success. You can have more success, but at least have a foundation. I wake up now at my age, I'm just thankful for another day of life. No one knows when they go to sleep tonight if they're waking up tomorrow. If they wake up today, they're going to sleep tonight. So really break it down into just a blessing of being around this world. And you get that over time. And then when you get really successful, it does give you perspective. You do have the best of the simple and the plain, and you get to enjoy maybe the upscale stuff, but know that it's transitory. Like they say, everything here is on loan. Nobody owns anything. It was here before you got here. It'll be here after you got here. So it's what kind of a steward you are. With that said, last words for all of us, Jason.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on what you said, Don. Gratitude is wealth. As you're grateful for what you do have, more is going to show up. So that's the first thing. The second thing is our universe is ever expanding. So why would we ever want to shrink? If the nature of things is to expand. So have that mindset, when you might not know exactly how you're going to do it, where you're going to go, but have an idea, have a plan, know where you're at, know where you want to go, and just start working towards it. That one step will get you to the next step, will get you to your goal.
Yeah, that's so important and valuable, because taking into consideration what you have, the blessings, and what you've had, no one can take away what's already been done, and you always carry that with you. And the only things that really meant the most to me is, what do I know and who do I know? And your network is your net worth at a certain point, because those will carry through. The other stuff, the fame, the glory, it's really nice at the time, but it has a short shelf life. It's almost like Peter Pepper picked a bunch of peppers.
My closing comment is that if you want life to get better, then you're going to have to try something new. It's kind of like they say, you can't win the lottery unless you buy a ticket. Not that I recommend buying lottery tickets, because that's really a low probability outcome. But every time you do something new, it may get better, it may get worse, it may be the same, but you won't know unless you try it. And if you want to transition, and you want to intentionally move forward, then there's going to be some experimentation, some challenges ahead of you, but you've got to try to get there.
Yeah. To get better, you need to be better. And for things to change, you need to change first, because you have control over that. And it's the little things that you can do. It's, so many people have, well, I don't have this, so forget about it. Well, whatever you got, put that into play, and if that's all you have, or a lot of times redirect little things that can compound over time. There was someone said, well, here's a book, why don't you read it? And someone says, well, it's 300 pages. I can't read 300 pages. Well, could you read a page a day? Yeah, for 2 minutes, I can read a page a day. Well, over a year, you'll probably end up reading 2 books you wouldn't have. And if you read a page a day, you might find it interesting enough to go for 3 or 4 pages. So
right.
too many people are already thinking of the end before they even approach the beginning. And give the universe and yourself an opportunity not to make judgments too early. But Carl's point, which I think is so important, just make a little change. Variety is the spice of life. Even if you go to a restaurant and it turned out to be not up to your standards, it'll make the restaurant it just came from seem a lot better. I mean, you don't know what you got until you see what everybody else has got. And then you say, wow, it's better than I thought it was, but it hasn't changed, but you have changed your thoughts. So thank you, everyone, which for this is Carrie, even though I'm going to have to check it out. We had a very strong audience here. Let me just share real quick. I think 20 plus, more than that, people have been watching this. Maybe it's restream, maybe it isn't, but thank you for watching it. More importantly, hopefully you got some great takeaways. I always get a lot of messages saying, because of this, I did this, or things changed for me. And that makes it all worthwhile. Because, it's one thing to help yourself, but by helping yourself, if you can help a lot of others, it makes a big difference. And this show will play for eternity if YouTube will continue to support it. So with that, I want to thank Carl, want to thank Jason so much. Makes my day so much better for being in it. And now has got my mind spinning in 20 different directions. It'll take a while to slow down, and I know something good will come from it. Tomorrow, come back. It's going to be Kelly and Dave. Success is the word of the day. Everybody is striving for that. And then we'll do it all again next week. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
And have a wonderful day.